Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. It's Way T. Lightheart from the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And I am so excited today because we have got a super special guest, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. And yes, Dr. Sanjay is a very well-known authority about a great deal of things. And he has an amazing story of how not only what he's been able to achieve in his life, but what I really love about the good doctor is that he looks at situations from an objective platform. He uses not just classical medical treatments for dealing with things like heart disease, but what are the things that you can use? What are the things that you can do to put yourself in the lowest risk categories for these cataclysmic events? And of course, with everything going on today in the world, people are panicking, people are emotionalized, people are really worried. Are they going to get sick? Are they going to get this virus thing? Are they at risk? And as we age, oftentimes that fear and anxiety has a contributory effect to our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, and even our relationships and the choices that we make. So he has been gracious enough today to join us from the UK to share with us some of his insights, some of his observations about how you can make yourself, as I like to say, close as you can get, bulletproof and Teflon coated, or certainly at least reduce your risk and allow yourself to be as healthy as possible. And a little bit of background about Dr. Gupta is he was born in Zambia. He was raised in Kenya. He has got just an absolute unbelievable resume here about his medical career, working in Brigham and the Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, a fellowship in cardiac magnetic resonance. He was a cardiologist at York Hospital in 2010, and he's dealt with all of these kind of technical things. He can talk about some of it. And his special interests include all aspects of non-invasive cardiology. Actually, one of my friends happens to be Dr. Horst Filzer, who was part of the team that put the first stent in the body. He was a vascular surgeon from Harvard, and he's very oriented on the invasive side. And so we always have these fun debates back and forth because I'm on the non-invasive side, if you will. And so I'm excited to get someone at that level, I would say, intellectual capability and professional credibility. Those are very, very important. So he spent almost 28 years in medicine, and it's just a delight to have you here. I'm going to let you kind of tell a little bit about your story, Dr. Gupta, because it's an amazing thing. How did you get your start, and what drove you to become a doctor in the first place? I'm always fascinated by it because a lot of people don't realize a medical doctor, and I have a number of friends who are in the medical profession, and the amount of dedication and devotion you have to have, and it's almost like taking a vow of poverty for decades as you get your education and go through your education and go through the fellowship, and the higher up you go, it's like the longer that time. And I got friends that they didn't get their first paycheck till their 30s or mid 30s, or some of them even till they were 40 years old to get to that level of credibility and expertise. What drove you to get started in this discipline?
I come from a Southeast Asian background. My parents are from India, and I'm their only child. They were always very typically very hardworking people who'd come from great poverty. My father was the first doctor in his family. And that was the one glimmer of hope he had out of poverty, the respect that brought him. He taught it, he paid for himself. And so being a doctor was a really big thing in our family because it brought my dad out from that poverty and gave him a degree of respectability. Sorry.
What part of India are your parents from? It's a big country.
So my mother's from Delhi and my father is from Punjab, the Punjab region.
Wonderful. I go to India quite regularly. I have my spiritual practice has emerged from India, so I have a big influence of Indian culture in my life. So I'm always curious because a lot of people don't recognize the different states are almost like different countries of
Countries,
completely different.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people kind of categorize India as one kind of concept, but it's like a collage
Mm,
of, I mean, everything you
it's
could say
huge.
about India, you could say the opposite and be true.
It,
It's such a diverse place.
so, so as a child, it was always drummed into me that being a doctor was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I really never grew up with any other kind of profession in mind, but I didn't really know why I was getting into it, apart from the fact that my dad was a doctor, apart from the fact that my mum wanted me to be a doctor. I never really appreciated it. And I went into medical school and my parents paid for my education, and I did it and I coasted through and there was no problems with that. And I did all my training, and to all intents and purposes, until that point, it was just something I did. It's only in the last 5 or 6 years that I truly found my place. I truly found something about it that completed me in the way that people talk about finding something that drives them on, that passion. And the thing I found is the ability to have this knowledge, but also to use aspects of your personality to connect with people and to empathize and to educate and to empower. And I have found that to be the most satisfying part of my whole life. This ability that actually, yes, I have the scientific background, but there is something about me that allows me to use it in an artistic way. So a lot of science is about controlling and measuring, research, controlling and measuring. You take something, you control it, you study a population, you extrapolate, and then you apply that to the individual person. But the problem is that when you are educated by things on populations, how do you take the person who wants to be treated as a person and not as a population? How do you take that information and apply it to them in a way that is unique to them, in a way that is aligned with their beliefs, in a way that appreciates that they are an individual and they have, you know, they have the right to ask for things and to expect things and to say no if they don't agree. And as a doctor, I've started realizing that actually the only thing that matters to me is the one patient in front of me, and that's it. And it doesn't really matter whether I've read something in a book or not. The most important thing is I have to learn. My patient will tell me what I need to know. And so that, I think, has been certainly the thing that has created a lot of happiness and contentment in my life, because I've suddenly started realizing, okay, this is my strength, or this is where I was meant to be. So at this point in time, I think I'm really, really happy to be a doctor, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity given to me. And I'd never really appreciated that before.
It's interesting that you say this, and I think a lot of people don't recognize is the culture of India has produced more medical doctors than any other culture in the world. And the chances wherever you find yourself in the world that you are going to be treated by a medical doctor who is of Indian origin and that background is actually the highest possibility that you can get. And I find that fascinating because I've traveled back and forth to that culture. And what I've find so amazing is there is, to me, embedded in the culture, this embedment with this kind of higher education, but it's balanced with kind of like a heart-based idealism, the essence of that culture, and what keeps bringing me back to that, and why I have so many Indian friends and why I really embrace that culture, because it's not devoid of both. And
Yes.
I think that's really powerful, because when you're in a position of authority that you are, and you're obviously operating from a level of education, background, and experience where people are coming to you, it's the last stop on the train sort of thing. Like, you are dealing with people's lives sometimes. The fact that you're able to bring that heart space into me, to me, is an extraordinary thing and a valuable thing. And I think something that a lot of people can recognize if they experience with a medical doctor, but don't always understand how challenging it is to bring that into the space when you've had so much conditioning around that. How are you able to kind of bring that emotional awareness or value into such a, what I would say, almost like a right brain philosophy into such a left brain system? If for those who like to go that left brain, right brain, of course, that's not really accurate, but it's kind
Yeah.
of that mentality.
I think it's that kind of rapport, and it's also basic, just basic humanity. I think that is the one thing that is missing in a lot of medicine these days: humanity. That, I think, is something. And the problem with medicine is that whilst it's valued greatly as a great, great profession, for the person who practices it, it can be really humdrum. A person comes in, oh, he's got this, you prescribe him this, he goes out the door. You can do that for a year or 2 years, and then after that it becomes monotonous. How do you make that interesting? How do you make that interesting? And what helps me make it interesting is that ability to go beyond that and talk to the person and get to know them and get them to know you, and somehow expose your own vulnerabilities by saying to people that actually, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but I sure as hell want to listen to you, and I sure as hell will try and facilitate whatever I can to try and help you in some way. And if I don't, then I'll try and send you to someone else who might be better than me at trying to work it out. But that, once you start demonstrating that actually, no, it's not that I'm right, you're wrong. No, I know you're not. That doesn't get you anywhere. That's not no fun. What is fun is to actually to say to someone, okay, hang on, uh, we could do this or we could do that, and then actually also talk to them about what's important in their lives and what they want, and what's really important from a doctor's perspective in life, etc. Once you start having these discussions, you start realizing that actually people start getting better. They start getting better because they feel reassured, which is far more powerful than giving them a tablet and sending them out. That doesn't seem to work as well. But when a person just feels that, oh my God, thank God you've listened to me, and it just feels so good, there's a weight lifted off my chest. Actually, I've seen what you've got to offer, and if you don't mind, I don't want those tablets. And I'd say, well, that's okay, because between you and me, I'd have done the same thing. But that's okay. I had to do my bit, and you have to do your bit. But at the end of the day, we're still friends, and I know where you're coming from, and I would have done the same thing. You do that, not only do you have patients for life, because they will always want to come and see you, but they become friends as well. They feel that they can come and talk to you about anything. And I've never found that too onerous. I've never found that to, in some way, um, you know, to be burdensome, even though a lot of people think, okay, if you put yourself out there, you're opening yourself up. No, people treat you with a lot of respect. People are very kind. People stand up for you when you need it. And that makes my life living and worth living.
So, outside of the current situation that's going on globally, what is a day in the life of Dr. Gupta like? Like, what kind of patients do you see nowadays, or who comes to see you, and how does your day-to-day life go, maybe on a patient to patient? And then the next thing I'd like to say is, you're a bit of a YouTube sensation out there, and people are gathering information from a lot of levels, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But then what's the bigger vision that seems that you've kind of connected your career to? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, a lot of my daily work is just, I would go from home after a breakfast, and then I would go in and go to our coronary care unit where all the sickest patients are. You introduce yourself to them, you talk to them about what's been going on, you plan their management. After that, I would go and see patients on the wards, and then in the afternoon, we would often do a clinic where people who are not so unwell, but who've waited several months to come and see us, will come with their chronic problems, and we try and address those. And to all intents and purposes, that is, there's nothing too exciting about it. Once you've done it once or for a year or 2 years, it gets a bit boring. Um, the way I started with the YouTube channel was a very interesting experience. A few years ago, again, I was just doing my normal thing, being a doctor. Person comes, you give them the tablets, you give them the usual spiel, you send them out. One thing I had noticed was, well, it was getting a bit monotonous. Two, I didn't think anyone was really getting any better. Yes, they would go out of the door, but I'd see them 6 months later. I'd see them a year later, and they'd be worse, and then they'd be worse. So you were seeing the same people over and over again, despite all these kind of advances in medicine, despite all these pills. Why are all these people coming back? So that wasn't fun, because you're having to deal with the same patients, so you've never really done anything corrective for them. And then things changed, where we had a very interesting and sad experience where one of my friends suddenly, out of the blue, had a heart attack. And it was a shock, but, not a huge shock for a cardiologist. There was nothing special about that. What was really interesting was that we had a lot of common friends, and all our common friends came to me and said, look, you're a cardiologist. This has been a shocking incident. Can you test me out now to try and stop this from happening to me? How I need to get checked out. And I very foolishly said, yes, I'm a cardiologist. I'll check you out and I'll make sure you're okay. And so I embarked on doing a series of investigations on these people, and found that they had a little bit of something, but nothing particularly horrible. But I couldn't console them that they were risk-free, because the more I looked, the more I realized that actually we can do very little to stop bad things from happening to you. We may be able to do it to a population.
Right.
So you can say, okay, you take a population of 1 million people, you give them all a statin or something like that. Maybe some will outlive others, but not everyone outlives everyone else. And so, who is that individual? Is you, the person in front of me? Are you going to be the one that benefits, or are you not? And will you even ever know?
Right.
So that's a really interesting thing. So when I was then faced with having to explain this to my colleagues, they were saying, okay, what can we do? And I'd say, oh, this is good. And they'd say, how good? I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to anyone asking me how good. Everyone, I would say it's good. People would take the tablet. Here I'm dealing with a bunch of people who see me as their friend, and they're now asking me how good. So I was saying, well, I'll have to go and look because if something is good, there must be a number to tell you how good, right? It's a very valid question. It has to be quantified in some way. So I'd go and look at the research and say, well, why is there no clarity over numbers? How good is something? So anyway, after great research, I found that actually, yes, it's good, but it's not that good at all. You would have to treat. So something like aspirin, for example, I was stunned. I thought, okay, well, how good is aspirin in someone who's never had a heart attack at preventing a heart attack in the future? You go to a doctor, they'll say, yeah, take aspirin. Aspirin's good. How good? And the answer was, you'd have to treat 1,667 people for a year to prevent something minor in one patient.
Wow.
The equivalent of putting $1,667 in the bank for $1 in return at the end of the year. And that dollar isn't even yours, because we don't know who that one person is who would benefit. You would have to treat the 1,667 people for someone to benefit, but no one will know who it is. So it's like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And certainly to my mind, I thought, gosh, is this the benefit? Is that all there is? Are these the benefits that we're talking about? Everyone's been given aspirin, everyone's been given this. So the more I look, the more I realize that actually medicines make very little difference. Yes, they may make a difference to a population, but they make very little difference to an individual. However, and in some ways, when you are trying to treat people for length of life purposes, you will never know. However, more important than length of life is quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone worries about length of life at the expense of the thing that they can actually measure, which is quality of life. So they risk their quality of life for something that they'll have no control over whatsoever. So suddenly I started realizing that actually, hey, what's bad in sleeping better? That improves our quality of life. And lo and behold, actually, that tends to make people live longer as well, generally. But it improves their quality of life. What's wrong with exercise? That improves your quality of life. There is no doubt that if you start exercising, your quality of life gets better than if you are sedentary. And probably is good for your long-term lifespan as well. Same with stress management. And same with nutrition. Again, eating good, healthy food is good. It makes us feel good, but it probably is good for us in the long run. So the more I came round to the more I thought about it, the more I came round to the idea that actually the only thing we can manage is our lifestyle. And if we lead a good lifestyle, actually our quality of life gets better. And probably we have some impact on our length of life. So that's where after all this, after doing all this medical work and after doing all these degrees and after prescribing lots and lots of medications, I said, first it has to start with empathy, engagement with the patient, educating the patient about what's important in life, talking to them about these aspects of their life that they may be neglecting and they may be masking with tablets, and finally empowering them and saying, okay, do what is right for you. I'm here to support you. And that would work better. And that's where I then started saying, okay, well, maybe that's an idea worth spreading. Maybe it's an idea worth spreading towards people, but actually just because someone says it's good, we don't know what. You're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to decide for yourself whether the numbers work for you or not. Because at the end of the day, if there's a number there, then the number is the number. It doesn't matter whether a presidential physician looks at them or an ordinary person. The number is the number. And everyone has the right to be shown the number to decide whether that number works for them. The problem is all the medical journals and everywhere else, the numbers get hidden away and they would say, oh, you take this and you double your chances of living longer. Well, that's a bit like saying you buy a lottery ticket. If you buy two, you double your chances of winning. The real chances of winning are still really, really, really low.
Right.
So why not give people the exact figures so that people can decide? And if there was a little bit more transparency, then there'd be a ton less distrust and anxiety in the community.
You bring up a couple of really valid points. That's something that we've been driving home on the lifestyle side with Bioptimizers. So we call the triangle that we work on is aesthetics, performance, and health. And everybody has a kind of an equation that's worked for them. For example, a high performance football player may make some decisions around performance that will compromise his health, getting hit in the head, and at some point that equation will change and maybe he'll retire his career or leave early, or the consequences of the risk come up. Or some people who, sexual attractiveness and getting a mate is a big deal. So they want to focus on aesthetics, or they're struggled, or they have self-esteem issues and stuff. And so everybody kind of goes through their own formula. But what I find interesting here that you're identifying is something that's really powerful, because I think there's a habit of people coming to a medical doctor and essentially turning over their authority to the doctor.
Yeah.
And wanting some sort of pill to get them out of the responsibility of their lifestyle. And then when that doesn't work, they want to come back and blame the doctor or blame the medical system or blame the hospital. And I don't think people recognize that there's only so much you can do for someone in that space. The onus is up to them. And would you say it's safe to say that, I guess, as a doctor inside that system, you really got two ways to go. You can kind of just like, well, hey, there's nothing I can do about it. and kind of go through it and live your career and do the best that you can and kind of stay within that chain. But you've obviously branched out into this other one. So, you know what? They have turned this responsibility. I do feel connected to this person, and I am in a position to provide insight or education or advice in these other areas because I can understand data. I can understand information. I know how to take apart a study. I know what a false study is. I know what real literature is. What was that like when you made that shift, and what was like, how did that impact your patients? People come
I
and
mean,
say,
I think universally, I think that by far, I never expected the response that I got. Um, People were incredibly appreciative. I couldn't believe it because I decided to do 3 or 4 videos on YouTube, and they were just the most amateurish things. And it was just me looking down and talking about something. But I was amazed that there were comments coming back, and I thought, God, someone's interested in this. You know, someone's interested in this. And then I started realizing that there was this craving. People were craving just some good knowledge, some reliable information, someone to make sense of things. I would have so many people, for example, say, "Oh, well, my heart rate is 50. I'm terrified. Isn't that too low?" And I'd say, "Well, think of it this way. What is the heart rate? What is it telling us? All it's telling us is blood has to get round at a certain amount. Well, if you're standing and talking to me, it doesn't really matter whether your heart rate's 10 or not. The blood's getting round, right? What else does? Even if you didn't have a heartbeat, the fact that you're standing up there and talking to me means that somehow the blood's getting round. So I wouldn't worry about that, because at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to worry about a number when you can see that the number is surrogate for something else, which is more important, which you can tell just by looking at yourself. So suddenly there was this, there are all these people who were so anxious about numbers, and doctors saying, "Oh, your blood pressure is so high, you could have a stroke," etc. And just being able to break it down, and somewhere I think that's a lost art, because a lot of doctors as well nowadays are trained in such a way that they are only focusing on guidance. They've been told this is bad, and that's the message you have to reiterate. Where does a true doctor come into this? To my mind, a true doctor is more pragmatic. He's more, he's more common sense based than anything else, and he's more patient based. He's not disease based. He's patient based. He's not trying to diagnose the disease. He's trying to diagnose what's going on with the patient.
beautifully
And
said.
and so that, I think, I was amazed at the kind of response I got. Um, it's gone from strength to strength. I've tried to, and with all these things, you start off one way and then you get molded according to the response and what satisfies you. So more and more, a lot of my consultations are very much like meetings with friends. They'll
Right.
come and I'll have little old ladies who will come with cake, and I'd be like in my clinic, and I'd say, "Let's get some cake, let's put some music on, and let's have some food." And people will say, "No, no, no, you shouldn't be doing this. You're promoting a bad message. You shouldn't be eating cake with a patient." And I'll say, "Well, look, hang on. She's 85 years old. Who am I to tell her what to do with her life? She's
Love
lived.
it.
She's gotten to 85. I don't know whether I'll get to 85. I need to learn from her. Whatever she's doing is right, because that's the proof, right? She got to 85. So I don't buy the fact that I'm going to tell this lady how to live better. I'm going to give her a good experience. I'm going to make her feel less scared. I'm going to let her go home with a smile on her face that she came and she was respected and she was treated like a human being, and someone listened to her. And as long as I've done that, I'm okay. It's a little bit unconventional, but it seems to work well for me.
I love it. I love that. I love the humility and the humanity behind that component, and it's like super magnetic. And obviously, I think there's more of that. I think the fact that you have the courage as a medical doctor to truly embrace the artistry side the art and science of medicine. The science is of course the background and the mechanics and the biology and all of those things that are absolutely critical to understand and to be able to have common sense. So if you don't know those things, you
Yeah,
can't
sure.
ask or answer the questions properly. But being able to curate them in a way that is understandable and treats the person and understands the emotional component of what they're really coming from, and that is some assurance and some guidance from someone that they're putting their trust in their life in beautifully. Just really refreshing. And I know why your YouTube channel is blowing up, because I think there is a deep craving from that, from our people who are in positions of authority, whether that's medical or even in other positions of authority. It's like, where's the heart? Where's the humanity? Where's that component?
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes, as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like Masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others, is a total game changer. Suddenly, you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
So we'll switch gears a little bit, and we'll dive a little bit into your expertise in around heart health and maybe health span. And there's health span and longevity. And I think to curate what that means for people is, I read a paper, it was about 10 or 15, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It was written by a Professor Oshansky, who did a really interesting research paper for the New England Journal of Medicine, and demonstrated that not only was the lifespan of the generations to come he expected to go down, but he said the disability adjusted lifespan was going way up. And that means the average person in the United States at 60 years old was on had some sort of debilitating condition or reliant on some sort of life compromising medicine, even though they might be living to be 80 years old or 85 years old. Their quality of life wasn't that good. And the information provided through a lot of our medical institutions is really treating the symptoms of disease as opposed to what are the lifestyle causes. So where I want to go with this is, what are some of the things that you've discovered in your experience around heart health and maintaining your heart? Because heart disease is still the number one killer in the world. What are some things that people need to incorporate in their lives, period, that you think that you found, and maybe some nuanced ones that might be right for some people?
I mean, I think the first and foremost thing is, I think the number one killer is stress. And I think it's amazing what we put our bodies through. There was a time 20 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, when I was a medical student, and there was nothing like the internet. We had no internet. We had no mobile phones. To do a small bit of work, something which would take a minute today, would take me the whole day. I would have to go to the library. I would have to look into Index Medicus. I'd have to find the references, etc., etc. Today, we can do that within a minute, yet we have less time now than we had then.
Why is that? This is the curious thing. I remember I went through that whole process too. At university, you had to go through looking for everything. And I remember We were starting with MS-DOS on the computer way back in the day with these little, inefficient computers. And they told us that our lives were going to get radically easier and radically less stress because the advent of technology, which was going to turn us into kind of this Jetson-like future where we'd be flying around in space cars, living to 200 years old, and everybody would be wealthy and happy.
It's because we when you create space, you just fill it up, don't you? And this is the problem, that the technology created space and we filled that up, and we filled that up with more. And there is this very constant message that goes out there, which is work hard, play hard, work harder, play harder. Happiness is just around the corner. Everything about the way governments work is to try and get people to work as hard as possible. And that comes at great personal sacrifice. It comes at the cost of mental health. Stress, there is so much trauma that goes on. There is so much breakup in families, marital breakup, bereavement, yet no one has the time. People don't have the time to grieve. People don't have the time to recalibrate. People don't have the time to do anything. It is seen as a sign of weakness. This message that, oh my God, you need to get on with it. You need to, otherwise you're going to be letting the side down. This is a wrong message to my mind. If you look at the societies where people are a lot more relaxed, the pace of life is a bit quieter. In general, you will see less disease there. Those people tend to be healthier, both mentally and physically. Mental health, you cannot be physically healthy if you're mentally unhealthy.
It's funny you should say that, because I've looked at a lot of the research around the blue zones, and I had another doctor who is an expert in brain health recently, Dr. Sarah Mackay. And one of the common elements from childhood to midlife to old age was social connections. And if you look at these blue zone areas, and I've been to Okinawa and Costa Rica and stuff, and you have these tight group communities. Age is valued. There's a certain respect in there. There's a natural fun. There's a lot of space, a lot of quietness, a lot of friendliness, and a lot of social connections. And, these people have been able to not only have long lives, but very productive and integrated lives that are fulfilling. They're not out, building billion-dollar brands, or they're not out there, checking their blood work every 30 minutes to see if their ketone levels are on par with the latest, supplement or drug that they took, or if their cognitive capacity is firing at 0.78 more, speed. It's a very interesting world. And you bring this topic up. So how does someone reduce stress in their life? How does someone in today's fast-paced world incorporate that spaciousness that allows you to kind of take on that mental health piece?
I mean, I think it is that, you have to have time for self-reflection. You have time. You have to have that time. You have to be able to think beyond the messages that you read everywhere. You have to be able to make a conscious decision not to join the rat race and spend your whole life. I'm fortunate because I'm in a profession where I see death on a daily basis. So, and even then, I don't necessarily do everything I preach. I just think that I know I can see exactly where the pressures lie, etc. But thinking about it is a good step forward in the right direction. I think it is important always to bear in mind that a bad thing can happen to anyone at any time. No one is immune. What we have control over is our quality of life. What we have control over is personal investment, personal growth. That is important, not to stagnate. I think it is important to focus on your health wherever possible and put that first. So if you're working, 20 hours a day, then I would say, actually, no, at some point, there are things about me that are important. I want to look after myself first. And then if I can squeeze it in, great. Uh, I know, I know it's very hard for some people. Some people aren't in a position where they can think like that. But there are lots of people who are in a position that can think like that, but choose not to. Because in some way, again, it is this very competitive world. It is this, okay, dog eats dog world. I think you can achieve a happier balance. I think you can sit back and say, okay, well, I do enough and that's okay. And that's all that matters. I get a ton of people come to me and say, look, I'm really worried, doctor. I've got two 6-year-olds and I want to be there for them when they get to 21. And I say, are you there for them now? Because if you're not there for them now, you're not going to be there for them when they're 21. If you suddenly think that your whole ethos will change when they get to 21, the answer is no. They'll hate you by the time they get to 21 because you're not there for them now. Second thing that can happen is they could die, you could die. Be there for them now. And that, to my mind, is the most important thing. So understanding that is really important. Living each day as it comes along, living each day and trying to live a wholehearted life. And this pursuit of materialistic things perhaps is more harmful to us than does us good, so the more you it does require a lot of kind of thought and reflection, etc. But I think somewhere I feel that I'm in the right kind of space. I'm heading towards the right space.
Now, do you believe in this spaciousness or in the kind of fast-paced world? Like, do you use any methodologies of contemplation, meditation, mindfulness, any of these things, or because obviously the demands of your job are pretty mentally rigorous.
Yeah.
Compared to say an average person. How do you do that in your world, which is super demanding? Like I said, you're dealing with death. I mean, it doesn't get any more stressful than that.
This is something I've only started incorporating in the last couple of years, and that is gratitude. My father was very unwell 2 years ago. I thought we were going to lose him. I remember there was a make or break night, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember lying there in my bed, and I didn't know. I was so scared. And I prayed. And ever since then, I've prayed every night. And it is not to ask for something. It is to say thank you. Thank you for that night. And I think that is what people mean by gratitude, being grateful for what you have. And as long as I do that, life seems to go okay. I think I can cope. I don't know, but it keeps me, it's something that's nice that I've brought into my life. So I'm grateful for that. So I do think, when you think about it, there are two things I think that you want to get to as a human being. You want to become more human, humanity and gratitude. If you have both, I think you've lived a good life. I think that's where fulfillment lies, humanity and gratitude.
Now, one of the things that I was curious about, because I checked in on your videos, and I was really blown away about your topic around magnesium and heart health specifically.
Yeah.
And it's been something that I've advocated for many years, and I've used magnesium regularly because, of course, living in North America, we have a massive deficiency in magnesium. I think there's over 350 different pathways that magnesium is an essential component. And stress and anxiety and caffeination and stimulation actually exhaust our magnesium levels and can have a wide variety of issues and components. What are some of the things that you've learned, and why have you become such a big proponent of magnesium in people's lives?
My first contact with the topic of magnesium came when I started doing some of the YouTube videos. And one of the videos I did was on heart palpitations. And when I did that, a lot of people, I was amazed at how many people responded with heart palpitations. They had been suffering for years. And I started looking into it a little bit more. And I actually found a patient with heart palpitations who'd done a video on magnesium. And I thought, oh, well, I didn't think much of it. But then 2 or 3 people said, I've tried magnesium, it's helped. And I thought, oh, gosh, I'll look into it. When I mentioned it to my colleagues, they said, oh, this is witchcraft, that it doesn't, there's nothing, So it became really important for me to be able to, because I'd actually recommended it to a few people just on the basis of what I'd heard anecdotally and said, look, you could try that. And they'd come back and said, yes, it has helped. So the next thing was, how do I support the idea of advising people on magnesium? I'm putting myself on a public platform. There has to be some evidence base, to my mind, because this is what everyone thrives on in the medical world these days. And I found a tiny study in Brazil, which indeed did confirm that actually if you had heart palpitations, in particular extra beats or missed beats, and you took magnesium, a significant number of people felt better. So I started looking into it and I thought, okay, this would be useful. I have some evidence here. I have anecdotal experience. I have my own clinical experience that something about magnesium seems to help these people. It improves their quality of life. And that's when I started doing a lot more reading. And I discovered that actually, I knew from a long time ago that virtually all chronic disease is, the core of chronic disease is inflammation, chronic inflammation,
The silent killer. Can't feel it,
exactly.
but it's happening all the time.
Exactly. It is that unhappiness of the body, largely because you're exposing it to an unhappy environment, stress, nutrition, etc. So with regards to the heart, you get hardening of the blood vessels that causes heart attacks. And again, inflammation is the core of that. And I started realizing that smoking, poor nutrition, all this kind of refined food, etc., is probably inflammatory. Lack of exercise, inflammatory. Lack of sleep, which is again probably the second biggest killer, I think, is inflammatory, and then stress is hugely inflammatory. And what we realize from a cardiac perspective is as your arteries harden, what happens is it becomes more difficult for the body to get the blood it needs. So for the heart to get blood in, you need nice, compliant blood vessels. Inflamed blood vessels in some way make it more difficult. And so anything that can actually increase the amount of the blood supply to our vital organs, open up our blood vessels is good. Anything that reduces inflammation is good. And one of the other problems is that actually when blood is more difficult to get through, it can stagnate and can form blood clots, etc. So if you had something which also had some degree of anticoagulant properties, that's a good thing. And when you look, magnesium has all those. It's so common. It's used for so many different reactions within the body. It has an anti-inflammatory effect. It has an anticoagulant effect. It opens up the blood vessels. So in that setting, it is the perfect chemical for good heart health. And so then when we start looking, we start realizing that actually it is no secret that 3/4 of the population in the West are magnesium deficient. And that's because of modern farming methods. That's because our stomachs are absorbing less because, lots of people are on proton pump inhibitors. We're suppressing the acid that God gave us. And so you're absorbing less and we're excreting a ton more. There's a lot more sugar in our diet, so we're using a lot more magnesium to break the sugar down. Lots of people are drinking coffee, tea, pharmacological diuretics. And so you're getting less, you're absorbing less, you're using more, you're excreting more. And therefore, not surprisingly, the next thing was, well, what does magnesium deficiency cause? And when you think about it, it seems to cause all the things that plague us these days, tiredness, anxiety, sleep disturbance, depression, restless legs, heart palpitations, all these things, elevated blood pressure because of the hardening of the arteries. When you look at magnesium, it can achieve a little bit of an improvement in blood pressure because of its vasodilatory properties. So again, to all intents and purposes, here was an agent that we started off with some proof that it seemed to help. And then when you look at the properties, you say, wow, it does have some good properties about it. And we know that lots of people are deficient in it. So why not recommend it to people? And at the end of the day, my reason for recommending it was not because, oh, you take it, you'll live long. My reason for recommending it is take it and see if you feel better. And if you feel better, that benefit's yours to have. What's not to like about feeling better? And we know it's safe. We know it's got you have to take a ton of magnesium to actually overdose. So at recommended doses, it's safe. Why not give it a go? And a lot of people came back and they said, oh, since you recommended the magnesium, I'm sleeping so much better. Oh, my heart palpitations have gone. My restless legs are better. This happens to me every single day, where someone will come and say, oh, that magnesium recommended has changed my life, every single day.
Very powerful. Very powerful. Now, do you suggest, or with people that come in typically, do you do any testing for magnesium, or or is there any dosage recommendation or types of magnesium that you feel is more effective? Because there's all different types of magnesium.
You're right. I mean, the first thing to say is there are no large-scale randomized clinical trials. So we don't have a particular dose, a particular agent, or even overwhelming evidence. But then again, who's going to do those trials? If trials are expensive to run, who's going to make money out of magnesium? No one's going to do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the blood test for magnesium is flawed, so you don't get an accurate result from the blood test. And I don't even know whether taking the magnesium is beneficial because it's about the magnesium. I don't know whether it's about whether there's a slight placebo effect. I don't know is the answer. But what I do know is that people who take this thing feel better and they don't come to harm. And that's really powerful to my mind. So I think, so from my perspective, I just say to people, take it and see how you feel. And if you feel better, great. And if you don't feel better, then don't waste your money. Because there are so many preparations, I would usually say, well, take the dose on the tin, the recommended dose on the tin that you've purchased, because at least we know that at that dose, that's a safe dose. Try that first and see what happens. Of all the different forms of magnesium, the only one that I'm not so persuaded by is magnesium oxide, which is because magnesium is usually combined with something else to allow it to get into the system. So they'll combine them with either oxide, which is chalk, or magnesium taurate, citrate. So you've got all these other names added to it. So magnesium oxide, only 4% of what you take in through your stomach gets absorbed in your body, but the others are a lot better absorbed. So in general, I would say you get a lot more for your buck if you try something other than magnesium oxide.
Yeah, I got first turned on to magnesium from a sports trainer. His name just eludes me at the second. I was just thinking of it and I lost it. They call him the Strength Sensei. And he had trained 27 different gold medalists in different sports. So it's gold medalists in different sports. Wow. And he had actually taught himself multiple different languages to look at research in other countries, because he said that there was research. Charles Poliquin was his name. Sorry, I lost it for a second. But so Charles you started looking at this, and he was noticing as his athletes who were under incredible levels of stress, he ascertained that they were dealing with magnesium deficiencies and couldn't run some of the metabolic processes. And so he started diving into this, and he said, well, some magnesiums were working for their nervous system, some was for their brain, some was for their heart. And so I saw a lecture with him a few years ago at the Bulletproof conference in California, and he just dropped a lot of gold. And to be able to produce so many different athletes in so many different sports. I'm like, there's something, it's very difficult to be really good at helping someone in one sport, let alone two sports, let alone three, let alone 27 at the world's best level. I need to listen to this fella. And he talked about two of his big components he had three different things: magnesium, essential fatty acids, and carnitine. And a lot of these athletes, of course, are training at if you look at the level of stress that an Olympic athlete is under, or a professional athlete, it's super high from a performance side. Have you seen any relations or any information around those things, essential fatty acids, or heart disease, or carnitine, or any of those things? Because I know they're part of that process of mitochondrial function, and which is, of course, your heart has the most mitochondria of anything else in your body. So what's your any insights around that area?
I mean, there's certainly some evidence, and reasonably good evidence, that omega-3 fatty acids have a beneficial effect. There was a study which suggested that in Japan, people had less heart attacks because of a fish-rich diet.
And they smoke more, which was just odd, like per capita.
Yeah. So exactly. So that was good data, and certainly, if someone says to me, "What should I do?" I would say magnesium is good, I think, and omega-3 fatty acids are good. I don't have enough insight into carnitine, but it was something that I wanted to look at and just sort of try and convince, try and read around it and see what exists. But I'm all for people trying things, as long as you've done your research, as long as it's affordable, as long as you know why you're doing it. And it's not toxic, as long as it's affordable and it's not toxic, and you know why you're doing it. You're doing it to see if it has a meaningful improvement in your quality of life. Length of life, no one knows. Quality of life, if it improves your quality of life, what's there not to like about trying things?
Yeah, you mentioned something that's, I like to correlate. One of the things that, of course, I was a former bodybuilder, and you get really dialed into your your physiology. And one of the things that I, kind of an intuitive, and I would write down how I felt or how my energy level was. And then as data became more available to, what I would say ordinary citizens like myself, I started trying to correlate data to my biofeedback, or how I felt. And in the case of magnesium, a number of years ago, I got into a pretty stressful situation. I was working ridiculous amount of hours, and I was under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, and really cooked myself, and started to suffer from the consequences of that lifestyle, as you'd say, without space or that energy. And when I actually did a SpectraCell test, which is they take blood out of you and then they send it off to this lab in Texas, and they spin it in these little tubes, and you can actually see how well you absorb different products as well as the deficiency. So it's a twofold test. It's very interesting. So I looked at it and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go on a course of magnesium, because magnesium was very deficient in me, and as was my B12 levels. So those are two areas where I was cooked. So what I did is I went down and I started taking, I started dosing up. I started at 1 gram of magnesium today, of multiple different kinds of magnesiums, and I ended up, I think I peaked at about 3, and now I'm down to about 1 gram per day. But I kind of went up until I get the runs. If I got the runs, then I knew that, okay, I'm not absorbing this amount. That's a good, and magnesium is one of the ones that can really trigger quickly, like vitamin C. But over the course of a year, I saw significant improvements. Not only did I take, now in the case of vitamin B12, I know there can be some absorption issues there, particularly because I'm a plant-based guy. So I was actually doing injections. I did some B12 injections in concordant with my magnesium, and I was able to bring those levels up much, much higher. So I actually got supportive data. But if I hadn't had that data, the literally biofeedback I was feeling on a day-to-day basis continued to improve to this day. And that's one of the reasons I'm a big advocate of those type of things. But I think you say something really important. And that is keeping an open mind and be willing to try something as opposed to be so rigid. Well, that's not going to work. Well, how do you know if you don't know? I mean, just try it. How did you get to that kind of such an open-ended suggestion? Because usually you come to the doctor and it's like, no. Take 3 of these. Here's this prescription. Go do that. Come see me in 3 months or whatever. And and that's kind of it. How did you open that door for yourself and for your clients?
It comes to the realization that actually what I'm doing is really very limited. I mean, our medicines are very, very limited. Certainly, in terms of stopping people from getting broken, we don't do anything. We're reasonably okay when someone is broken to try and sort of patch things up. But there are so many people with chronic disease who are suffering away. And the reason they're suffering is because our medicines don't work. That's why they're suffering. If our medicines were working, then why would they be suffering? Lots of people have pain. They have, lack of sleep, insomnia. They've got restless legs. They've got all sorts of things. So I'm very open to the idea of trying out everything. I encourage people to go and see acupuncturists if they want to. At the end of the day, my commitment is to that patient. My commitment is not to the thing that I know about. My commitment is to that patient. And therefore, I believe in setting teams around the patient. I believe in working with other people and saying, okay, well, try him. If I can't relieve your pain, and if none of my colleagues can, why not try something else? I don't have a problem with that. You try it as long as you can afford it, as long as you've done your research. I'm all for it. If it works, great. And there are so many people who'll say, oh, I went to that acupuncturist and my fibromyalgia is gone. Well, great. That's what for me, that's a celebration, not a defeat. It's a celebration. I celebrate with my patient that actually, yay, we've gotten you better. That's where we wanted to be, didn't we? Not, oh, well, you've gone to someone else. So, in some way that's a competition. We have to think about the person in the middle, not about ourselves. So, and I guess my patients realize that, and I do that all the time. And I say to them, look, you have to realize that I want to get you better. My whole aim is that I want to get you better, whatever that may be, whoever does that. As long as you got better, I feel that I've done my bit. So that rapport has come, that ability to be able to recommend these things and to let people take these things has come from being very open with the patient. And I say exactly that. I say, I don't know whether you're going to live longer. I don't know whether it's going to stop you having a heart attack. I don't know. How do I know? But hey, try it. If suddenly you feel better, come back and tell me about it and we'll have a drink over it. And if it doesn't, then you're not going to hate me for trying something, and they like that, because here is someone who's actually giving them something else more than just a tablet that they haven't heard of, tablet which has got horrible side effects listed in the box that it comes in, a tablet that costs a ton of money, a tablet that suddenly will impact on their insurance, etc.
So beautiful that you have that. Now, of course, we're living in extremely stressful times, and I think that's really unhealthy and uncertain times. Is there any suggestions that you have, because you've been so gracious with your times, about people who are dealing with the current, global situation? How do they manage their lives? How do they handle this? What are the things that you're concerned about, or you have advice about for the general population of what they need to be focusing on or what they need to be doing during this kind of very, very uncertain time where we're getting all this confluence of disinformation, misinformation, highly emotionalized, politicized, numericalized, everything. And people are just getting more and more worked up, more and more stressed. And it seems very, very anxious on a global scale. Any things that you feel is important for people to remember during the current situation?
I mean, I think that the first thing to say is, yes, it's scary, but with something like this, it teaches us a ton as well. It teaches us that, that actually, whilst you're out there fighting and trying to get ahead, actually, when it comes to something like this, it tells you what's the important things are. It tells you that if you've got your family near you, that actually, despite all that's going on outside, a lot of people I don't think are as stressed inside. They're probably more at peace inside. They're stressed about the material side. They're stressed about their jobs. They're stressed about the future. But in that within that, with that storm, we're somewhat in the eye of the storm in our own little houses with our own loved ones near us. It teaches us the importance of gratitude. I think the fact that we should be grateful for what we do have. It teaches us the importance of humanity, and we see that on a regular basis where people are coming together in a way that they would not have come together if we didn't have this thing going on around us, and thanking each other and appreciating each other. And it teaches us about the importance of nature and how nature needs to be nurtured, and how nature is thriving. It teaches us to be more compassionate to animals, and all that kind of thing, where you go and you see animals trapped in a zoo, and it teaches us the importance of freedom and all that kind of stuff. So one can take this in a philosophical sense and say, okay, actually, when would I ever have been witness to seeing something like that? This is a momentous kind of time in our lifetimes. For all of us, probably, this is going to be the most defining few weeks of our lives, the one that we will remember forever. So that in itself is something awe-inspiring. You feel awed by the fact that actually the world has just stopped. We never thought that was possible, but it does. So in that sense, it's good. The second thing I would say is that, of course, despite all that, I think it is important to understand that with this particular virus, the first thing is the virus, of course, tends to affect people who are more vulnerable, but can affect anyone. The chances of catching the virus are the same. The chances of something bad happening to you if you get the virus are greater if you're a sicker person. That doesn't mean to say that if you're not a sick person, you will be absolutely fine. So anytime you have this, the best thing you can do is do everything you can not to get the virus. If you do that, you're doing the best for yourself and doing the best for everyone else. The second thing I would say is that I do think it is important not to be put off when you feel that you need help to go to a hospital. The hospitals have plenty of beds. In fact, the biggest concern I have is that people who have genuine complaints are not going into a hospital early enough for fear of the virus. So it is really important that those people who are getting things like chest pain in the middle of the night, who've noticed a bit of visual disturbance, paralysis, anything like that, they don't put it off. They go in there and they seek help. Because in that setting, I think the risk from the virus is far less than the benefits of getting early intervention, early treatment, etc. Other than that, I think only time will tell what is going on. But at the moment, as long as we're with our loved ones, as long as we're healthy, it is very much like when we go when we go to work in our cars any day. Anything can happen at any time. But hey ho, enjoy the ride.
It's a great perspective, and you've been so gracious with your time. People, I think you've got a great YouTube channel. I think you provide some really good information. And of course, where it's coming from, I think, is even the best space of all. Where can people find you, Dr. Gupta, and your YouTube channel, social media, things like that, where they can find more information about your philosophy and things that you find that work? I think it's fascinating, and it's been just so great to have you here. So if you can share that with our listeners, we can put this all in the show notes so people can find you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. So I have a YouTube channel, which is called York Cardiology, YORK Cardiology. And you can look for me on Instagram on York Cardiology, and also on Facebook for York Cardiology. So York Cardiology is the kind of brand name. I have a website where I try and transcribe everything I say. and that is called drsanjayguptacardiologist.com. So those are my two main hubs where you can find me.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today on the Awesome Health show from Bioptimizers. I mean, this is the kind of thing that gets me so juiced up, and I'm really grateful that you've shared your insight as a medical professional and opened up the humanity side of what it means to be a heart-based physician, literally and figuratively. I think it's really beautiful, and I thank you for your work that you're continuing to do in this world and taking the time today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed myself.
Great. Well, that's another day for the Awesome Health Podcast. Be sure to check out Dr. Gupta's site. He's got some great YouTube videos. Pop yourself some magnesium, take some essential fatty acids, hug your loved ones, stay at home, but enjoy the space with a little bit of gratitude, and you've got it all figured out. So thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you again on our next episode.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.